Hey, what's up, world? In this week's episode of Harmful Content, I'm going to be investigating how the powers that shouldn't be used and continue to use misinformation and disinformation to scare people into complying with COVID response measures. Specifically, though, scaring people into getting vaccinated. Let's begin by looking at this article published by The Telegraph that actually acknowledges that fear was in fact used to control the public's behavior. Now, unfortunately, The Telegraph, the website, wants us to subscribe to them in order to read any of their articles. But fortunately, I found this article for free on another website. So it was published originally in The Telegraph. It is titled, Use of Fear to Control Behavior in COVID Crisis Was Totalitarian, Admits Scientist. And it was authored by this guy, Gordon Rayner. And it was published on May 14th of 2021. So let's read a little bit from this article. Scientists on a committee that encouraged the use of fear to control people's behavior during the COVID pandemic have admitted its work was unethical and totalitarian. So let's see what this article says. So, members of the Scientific Pandemic Influenza Group on Behavior, SPIB, expressed regret about the tactics in a new book about the role of psychology in the government's COVID-19 response. SPIB warned in March last year that ministers needed to increase, quote, the perceived level of personal threat, unquote, from COVID-19 because, quote, a substantial number of people still do not feel sufficiently personally threatened. Gavin Morgan, a psychologist on the team, said, clearly, using fear as a means of control is not ethical. Using fear smacks of totalitarianism. It's not an ethical stance for any modern government. By nature, I am an optimistic person, but all of this has given me a more pessimistic view of people. Not of government and not of people in power, but just a pessimistic view of people in general. Let's read a little bit more of this article. Mr. Morgan spoke to author Laura Dodsworth, who has spent a year investigating the government's tactics for her book, A State of Fear, published on Monday. Ministers have faced repeated accusations that they ramped up the threat from the pandemic to justify lockdowns and coerce the public into abiding by them, a claim that will be examined by the forthcoming public inquiry into the pandemic response. Yeah, and I'm sure that nobody on this public inquiry, or nobody involved in this public inquiry, I'm sure that all of them are just perfect angels that we can all trust. I'm sure that none of them have any connections to the government or to the powers that shouldn't be. Sure thing. So I'm not going to read any more of this article. I just wanted to cover this article to show that the government did use fear to control the public's behavior. Now, this particular article is about controlling the public's behavior when it comes to lockdown measures. And I'm sure that this article and that these people will justify this by saying the public wasn't aware enough of the dangers, so we simply had to make them aware of the dangers by, making them afraid. And I'm sure that they'll say that, we only presented facts, we didn't spread misinformation or disinformation, and I'm sure that this inquiry will find that the government did not do anything wrong. And I'm sure that when this person over here, when they say, by nature, I am an optimistic person, but all of this has given me a more pessimistic view of people, I'm sure that this person is really talking about the fact that, people need to be tricked with fear into complying with common sense. I'm sure that's the angle that they will go with this. Now, the rest of this video, I'm going to be focusing on how they use misinformation and disinformation to coerce people into getting vaccinated. Now, I'm going to start from the very beginning of the pandemic, or at least the beginning of the pandemic in the West, with this article that was published on April 27th of 2020 by MIT Technology Review. This article is titled, What If Immunity to COVID-19 Doesn't Last? Researchers say people can catch mild, cold-causing coronaviruses twice in the same year. Now, this is part of their fear program. Early on, they needed to get people to be terrified of this virus and to thinking that there was no natural response to this virus. And this is how they went about doing it. Let's look at this article. Starting in the fall of 2016 and continuing into 2018, researchers at Columbia University in Manhattan began collecting nasal swabs from 191 children, teachers, and emergency workers, asking them to record when they sneezed or had sore throats. The point was to create a map of common respiratory viruses and their symptoms, and how long people who recovered stayed immune to each one. The research included 4 coronaviruses, and list off those 4, which circulate widely every year but don't get much attention because they only cause common colds. But now that a new coronavirus in the same broad family, SARS-CoV-2, has the world on lockdown, information about the mild virus is among our clues to how the pandemic might unfold. What the Columbia researchers now describe in a preliminary report is cause for concern. Yes, they want the public to be concerned and scared. They found that people frequently got reinfected with the same coronavirus even in the same year, and sometimes more than once. Over a year and a half, a dozen of the volunteers tested positive 2 or 3 times for the same virus. In one case, with just 4 weeks between positive results. That's a stark difference from the pattern with infections like measles or chickenpox, where people who recover can expect to be immune for life. Now I'm going to just take a break from there. This kind of reminded me, at least this line right here, where it's like in one case, with just 4 weeks between positive results. So there was a case where a person tested positive for the same coronavirus within 4 weeks. Now, this, of course, reminded me of this fact, which is that people who have recovered from COVID-19 can continue to test positive for up to 3 months after their infection. That's what that kind of reminded me of. Anyway, let's get back to this article. For the coronaviruses, immunity seems to wane quickly, says Jeffrey Shaman. I like how his name is Shaman. It's actually Shaman, but it's like a shaman, who carried out the research with Marta Galanti, a postdoctoral researcher. And then it quotes one of these two, and it says, "What I have been telling everyone, and no one believes me, but it's true, is we get coronaviruses every winter, even though we're seroconverted," which means that we have like the antibodies or whatever in our system, says Matthew Freeman, who studies the virus family at the University of Maryland. That is, even though most people have previously developed antibodies to them, they get the viruses again. We really don't understand whether it is a change in the virus over time or antibodies that don't protect from infection, he says. This is a total lie, okay? They know very well that it's because of the change in the virus. That's why. That's why this doesn't happen with other viruses like chickenpox, because those viruses don't mutate like these flu viruses or these common cold-causing viruses. So right here, this is a complete and downright lie. But the most important thing is that this article, it jumps to the conclusion that, immunity to COVID-19 doesn't last. And they rushed this out there, even though they had no evidence on the actual COVID-19. They had zero evidence on COVID-19, but they rushed articles like this out there anyway to terrify people. This is a campaign of terror and nothing short of that. Now, it's very interesting. We're going to be looking at an article, also from MIT, less than a year later, and guess what it's titled? COVID-19 immunity likely lasts for years. This is also from MIT, but we'll be looking at that later. Let's now go to the next bit of propaganda that came out in early 2020, or at least mid-2020, but early on in the pandemic. This article comes to us from Mother Jones. It's titled, "Anti-vaxxers have a dangerous theory called natural immunity. Now it's going mainstream." Now wait until you guys see this shit. This is just hilarious. On April 26, 2 California physicians posted a video on YouTube about what they said was a potentially deadly side effect of social distancing. Our immune system will get weaker because of lack of exposure to germs. They weren't the only ones to make this argument. In a May 4th video, a controversial and outspoken Dr. Shiva whatever, an engineer who claims to have invented email, also embraces this idea. In a May 3rd YouTube video, he announced, "Viruses do not harm or kill us. Instead," he argues, Your body is an amazing being. It knows how to take care of itself, and that's how we get immune health. But these politicians, the CDC and the NIH, they're not talking about any of this. Shame on them, it's criminal. Now, of course, the doctors that this article is talking about here are the California physicians. I'm sure everyone remembers this. These California physicians, I believe their YouTube account actually got shut down after making this video. I think that they made this video. People who shared this video on Twitter, they had their stuff shut down. So that's who they're talking about. Now, that's who those doctors are. This guy over here, though, this Dr. Shiva, whatever, this engineer who claims to have invented email, I'm sure that this guy is just spreading misinformation. He's just spreading like hysterical misinformation that's just totally ridiculous. Like when he says viruses do not harm or kill us, this guy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. This right here is just controlled opposition. That's what this guy is. At least that's what I think he is. But that's a digression. Let's go back to reading the article. It's not hard to see why this content took off. The idea, or the basic contours of it at least, has some elements of truth. Immunologists have shown that, in general, we strengthen our immune system by exposing them to pathogens. In the last few decades, researchers have amassed evidence to suggest that some chronic conditions that are common in the developed world, but rare in poorer countries, including asthma, allergies, and autoimmune illnesses like Crohn's disease, could be the result of an environment that doesn't have enough germs, causing the immune system to go haywire. Or maybe what it is that these poorer countries don't have as many vaccines that, have adjuvants that agitate the immune system and cause it to go haywire. Maybe that could be it too. I'm just saying, I'm just putting that idea out there. They also had this quote here. In order for our immune system to be harmed by social distancing, we would have to live in a sterile setting for a long time in which no bacteria or germs could affect us. Okay, so keep in mind, that's what this article was pushing. This article, remember, is by Mother Jones. Anti-vaxxers have a dangerous theory called natural immunity, right? You want to see something hilarious, guys? Check this out. Article from just a couple of days ago. Children are being infected with up to 3 viruses at a time because COVID measures have worn down their immune system and made them vulnerable to illnesses usually only caught in winter, experts warn. This was published June 14th of 2022. Look at that. 2 years later, will we get a retraction from this person? Will we get an update on this? Will they admit that they were wrong? Will they be at all reprimanded or punished for spreading misinformation, disinformation, false information, whatever you want to call it? Oh, of course not. That won't happen at all. Instead, channels like mine that report on the truth, the actual truth, channels like mine will be labeled harmful content and will not be able to get monetized at all and will be shadow banned. Yep, that's exactly what happens. That's the world that we live in. Let's now return back to the campaign of lies and terror. Now, this article, this is where I get to the point where I say it's misinformation or disinformation, okay? Because it's not intentional outright lies. They're giving true factual information there, but the thing is that that information is being used to mislead the public or to deceive the public. And I'm going to show you that right now. Let's look at this article. So this is the first study. This article is about the first study directly connected to COVID-19 from The Guardian. Immunity to COVID-19 could be lost in months, UK studies suggest. I love the title. Could be lost in months. So let's read this article. People who have recovered from COVID-19 may lose their immunity to the disease within months, according to research suggesting the virus could reinfect people year after year like common colds. In the first longitudinal study of its kind, scientists analyzed the immune response of more than 90 patients and healthcare workers at Guy's and St. Thomas's NHS Foundation Trust and found levels of antibodies that can destroy the virus peaked about 3 weeks after the onset of symptoms, then swiftly declined. Blood tests revealed that while 60% of people marshaled a potent antibody response at the height of their battle with the virus, only 17% retained the same potency 3 months later. Antibody levels fell as much as 23-fold over the period. In some cases, they became undetectable. Now, when this article came out, everybody was reporting on it. This one was from The Guardian, this one was from CNN, and it appears like the other news outlets, I don't even know if you can call them news outlets, these other media outlets or these other propaganda outlets, they seem to have done a good job at bearing their coverage of this study. And they came out and it was all over the place. They were like, oh yeah, COVID-19, there's no natural protection. Our natural immune response is going to be lost in such a short period of time. All the antibodies are gone after 3 months. This idea of herd immunity is ridiculous and it needs to be put out the door. We need to start rolling out the vaccines as soon as possible. So everybody was reporting on it, and they had this whole campaign into thinking that their natural immunity to COVID-19 would be lost in a couple of months. Now, what's interesting is right after this study in July, you had another study roll out in September. Now, Forbes covers this study in this article titled, "Why We Can't Rely on Natural Immunity to Protect Us from COVID-19. Now, let's read a little bit of this article. There's a question that has crossed all our minds at some point, yet has no satisfactory answer. If I'm infected with SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, how long am I immune? A more technical way of asking the same question is, how long do anti-SARS-CoV-2 antibodies that bind to the spike protein persist?" Now, this is not true at all. This is not another way or a technical way of asking the same question. And now this study is basically this study did exactly the same thing as the previous study. It just did it in a different country. I believe this study was done in the United States. The other study was done in the United Kingdom. So this study just looked at the antibodies of people who were infected, the antibodies that, attack the virus supposedly. And it was like, oh, look, these antibodies, they're declining. So instead of reading the study, because it's exactly the same as the other study, I'll actually show you, this is actually the name of the study, "Change in Antibodies to SARS-CoV-2 Over 60 Days Among Healthcare Personnel in Nashville, Tennessee." So this, you see, the study was conducted in Nashville, Tennessee. And as you see, the study focused on the change in the antibodies to SARS-CoV-2. That's what these studies focused on, right? However, finally, here is a real study published by Science. Okay, it's titled "Immunological Memory to SARS-CoV-2 Assessed for Up to 8 Months After Infection." Now, this study, the most important thing from this study, I can read this study. This study is incredibly long. I recommend that you guys actually look up this study and read it yourself. But here's the conclusion of this study. Substantial immune memory is generated after COVID-19, involving all 4 major types of immune memory. About 95% of subjects retained immune memory at 6 months after infection. Circulating antibody titers were not predictive of T-cell memory. Thus, simple serological tests for SARS-CoV-2 antibodies do not reflect the richness and durability of immune memory to SARS-CoV-2. This work expands our understanding of immune memory in humans. These results have implications for protective immunity against SARS-CoV-2 and recurrent COVID-19. So finally, some truth. Now, this MIT Technology Review article that I had shown earlier, that's titled "COVID-19 Immunity Likely Lasts for Years," was actually about that research. It was about this research, the immunological memory. So finally, MIT came out and they published a good article. Now, what's even more interesting, if we go back to the summer of 2020, when they were pushing the fear surrounding the decline of antibodies, there was actually another article published in Nature magazine that informed us the following. Next, we showed that patients who recovered from SARS, the disease associated with SARS-CoV infection, possesses long-lasting memory T cells that are reactive to the N protein of SARS-CoV 17 years after the outbreak of SARS in 2003. These T cells displayed robust cross-reactivity to the N protein of SARS-CoV-2. So check this out. I just want to quickly catch up with ourselves and summarize some of the information that we've gone over so far. Early on in the pandemic, they looked at other coronaviruses. Remember, coronaviruses is a broad family of viruses. They looked at other coronaviruses that cause mild cold-causing illnesses, right? This is what this MIT technology article review was looking at, right? But what they could have done is at this time, they could have looked at the virus most closely related to the COVID-19 virus, which is the original SARS virus. And if they would have looked at the original SARS virus, and actually they did do this in July of 2020, they could have shown that, hey, guess what? Actually, our immunological memory appears to last for over 17 years to this virus. See, why didn't they do this? It's very interesting. I mean, I know why they didn't do this, and we all know why they didn't do this, but this is proof that they were running a campaign of intentional misinformation and disinformation, but they were not reporting heavily on this information. They should have been reporting heavily on this information. If they were responsible people who had a soul and weren't evil, they would have reported on this information. But instead, they reported on all that other nonsense information, all this other bullshit that we looked at. Instead, they decided to report on all of that shit. Why? To push fear, to terrorize people into complying with tyrannical government measures. So if we fast forward a couple of months from January 6th of 2021 to September 22nd of 2021, we come back to the propaganda. So this article is from The Guardian. It's titled, "It's shocking to see so many left-wingers lured to the far right by conspiracy theories." Now, I want to look at this article because I find the sophistry in it absolutely amazing. So let's check out this sophistry. It's an uncomfortable thing to admit, but in the countercultural movements where my sympathies lie, yeah, his sympathies really lie with you guys, people are dropping like flies. Okay, we'll see, right? He says that they're dropping like flies here, right? This must mean that they're dying, right? Every few days, I hear of another acquaintance who has become seriously ill with COVID after proudly proclaiming the benefits of natural immunity, denouncing vaccines, and refusing to take the precautions that apply to lesser mortals. Some have been hospitalized. Okay, so they haven't died. They actually haven't been dropping like flies. And only some of them have been hospitalized. Okay. Within these circles, which have for so long sought to cultivate a good society, there are people actively threatening the lives of others. It's not just anti-vax beliefs that have been spreading throughout these movements. On an almost daily basis, I see conspiracy theories traveling smoothly from right to left. I hear right-on people mouthing the claims of white supremacists, apparently in total ignorance of their origins. I encounter hippies who once sought to build communities sharing the memes of extreme individualism. Wow. Incredible. Something has gone badly wrong in parts of the alternative scene. Badly wrong. Instead of saying something has gone wrong, something has gone badly wrong. So anyway, I just wanted to share some of this sophistry. I found it to be hilarious. If you ever run into this guy in a dark alley, please do not harm him. Please, if you ever see him in a dark alley, thank him very kindly for his excellent work. Let him know that you really appreciate his work if you ever run into this guy in a dark alley. Now, before moving on to our next article, let's remember that this article is from September 22nd. Just a couple of days later, actually like a week later, we have another propaganda piece from the Washington Post. This one is titled, "How the phrase natural immunity misleads us about real risk and dangers." Now, these people are hilarious when they're talking about misleading people about risk and dangers, right? So what's funny is this little subtitle here, right? Antibodies to the coronavirus are not better just because they are natural. Now, this is something we're going to be looking at. I'm going to be proving, I have already proven this in previous videos, but I'm going to prove in this video also that he's wrong, that actually the natural antibodies are better than the antibodies that you receive from vaccination. I'm going to prove that not with lies, not with misinformation, not with disinformation, but with factual information. I know YouTube, you hate factual information. You think factual, true information is harmful, but don't worry, I will be sharing that information and I will be obtaining that information from a reliable source such as the Red Cross. which we'll be getting to in a second. So this whole article, I don't have to read this article. This whole article is just pretty much a propaganda piece that focuses on this idea that, oh yeah, that they're just claiming natural immunity is better. And I believe this article also pushes the hybrid immunity nonsense, where around this time, they start to say, oh, well, we want the strongest immunity, which is a mixture of the natural immunity, with those people who have the natural immunity, plus the vaccine. If you have the vaccine and the natural immunity, it's stronger than both. And that's the logic that they started to use around this time. Now, I have this CNN article over here. I don't know when it was dated. However, it is around the Delta variant, so it was sometime in 2021. There's no article, it's a video, but I like what is said over here, okay? So Surgeon General reacts to anti-vaxxers' claim about natural immunity. U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy says though people can gain some immunity protection after contracting COVID-19, it's not nearly as strong as the vaccines. Murthy says the population needs as much protection as possible against the more dangerous Delta variant. Now, see, this is what I said before. This is when they start to push the nonsense of like, oh, we need as much protection as possible. The vaccine isn't enough and the natural immunity isn't enough. You need a combination of the two. So even if you have the natural immunity, you should get the vaccine. And even if you don't have the natural immunity, you should also get the vaccine regardless. So this is a win-win for the vaccine producers. And this is the nonsense that they start to push at this time. And I'm going to be, proving this, of course, to be entirely untrue, okay? So let's look at this next article from Medical News Today. Now, this is October of 2021. Remember, the previous propaganda articles that we saw all came out in September. So they had this period of propaganda articles come out during September. And then in October, you're going to see what they returned to doing in October. Let's read this article, okay? Medical News Today. Coronavirus reinfection. How long might natural immunity last? And it's from this absolute creature. But let's get back to this, okay? So having COVID-19 should confer some immunity against developing the disease again. But health experts do not know how long this immunity lasts. So check that out, okay? So just earlier this year, they said that the immunity can last for years. Now they're like, oh no, we don't know how long the immunity can last for. Scientists know that some people have developed COVID-19 more than once, but there is not enough data for scientists to be able to analyze how long natural immunity lasts. There are not enough. Oh my goodness, these people cannot write. These people don't know science and they don't know how to write, obviously. But yet they're out there telling the world how to live. Amazing and just absolutely incredible. Having studied the genome of SARS-CoV-2, researchers suggest that among unvaccinated people, reinfection could happen as soon as 3 months after contracting the virus. Now check this out, okay? You guys, the sophistry, the misinformation, the disinformation. Remember, misinformation is information that's used to mislead the public. That information isn't necessarily untrue. It's just simply being used in a misleading way. The same thing with disinformation. Disinformation is information, factual information, that is being used to deceive the public. Disinformation, deceive. So let's look at this deception. According to Our World in Data, nearly half of the world's population have received at least one dose of the vaccine against SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. Scientists have shown that COVID-19 vaccines reduce the severity of the illness, but do not confer complete protection against COVID-19. Well, at least you can admit that. At the beginning of the pandemic, some jurisdictions, including those in the United Kingdom and Sweden, pursued a policy of herd immunity, which assumed that allowing enough people to catch the virus would confer enough immunity on the population to end the pandemic. While there have been some reports of people developing COVID-19 more than once, these numbers are too small to carry out an epidemiological study. This means that it is difficult to determine how long immunity conferred from a SARS-CoV-2 infection lasts. So by January of this year of 2021, not our current year of 2022, but of the same year that this propaganda is being produced, by January, which is like, what is it, 9 months before this? Actually, I think this article came out in October. So 10 months before this article came out, they had enough information to say that our immunity could last, or at least our immunological memory can last for years, right? They had enough information then. So why is it that 10 months after that good study that had lots of data, now all of a sudden, oh, there's just not enough data. We just don't know exactly how long the natural immunity lasts. Incredible. So in the present study, let's return back to the article. In the present study, researchers have conducted an analysis of previously published data on viruses similar to SARS-CoV-2. They set out to determine how long immunity following COVID-19 might last. Okay, whoa, wait a second. This is returning back to the first set of propaganda. This is literally going back to the first set of MIT propaganda, that first article that we looked at from MIT, that looked at other viruses, that looked at other coronaviruses that cause common colds to determine how long immunity would last for COVID-19. This expert right here, this total expert right here, you can just look at her. I mean, she just, when I look at her, all I can think is this is definitely an expert. Definitely doesn't have oily hair. Expert in every field possible. So this expert, she writes this article covering a study. It's covering research that is basically doing the same research that was done like over a year before it, a year and a half before. Incredible. Totally ignoring this research right here. Totally ignoring the fact that the previous SARS virus, people have shown to have natural immunity to that virus for over 17 years. Totally ignoring that. And coming back to this, but actually if you look at the study, and it's hilarious too, if you look at the study, the research, which appears in the Lancet Microbe, this is actually really hilarious. I can't even, before I go into the research, I have to read this, right? Okay, so the research, which appears in the Lancet Microbe, can expect immunity against infection to last 3 to 63 months after developing COVID-19, if the virus is still circulating in the community. So before I even look at the Lancet Microbe article, I just have to get a kick out of this. The immunity can last between 3 and 63 months. Now, the best part is that this article from this expert, from this total expert, she's like kind of summarizing the article, she only mentions 3 months. It's like, oh yeah, reinfection can happen as soon as 3 months after contracting the virus. Why not state here, protection, natural immunity can last between 3 and 64 months? Why not add that? Because this is all disinformation, misinformation. They are misleading the public. Now let's look at the study from the Lancet, right? So findings. We obtained antibody optical density data for 6 human-infecting coronaviruses, extending from 128 days to 28 years after infection, between 1984 and 2020. These data, oh my goodness, another group of people that can't write. For those who don't know, data is a plural word, okay? So it should say this data, not these data. These is like trying to pluralize data as if data is a singular word. It should just say this data. So these people, as I'm showing, these people, none of them are experts in anything. Okay, these people, they got to where they are because of corruption, nepotism, and a whole host of other things going on in our world that people seem to be totally turning a blind eye to. So this data provided a means to estimate profiles of the typical antibody decline and probabilities of reinfection over time under endemic conditions. Okay, so once again, not only is it repeating the same nonsense that this article repeated, about comparing it to other viruses, not only is it repeating that nonsense, but this study is also looking at antibodies again. Instead of looking at immunological memory, this girl, Hannah, she writes an article in October of 2021, after that article about immunological memory and after all of those other articles, she writes an article in October of 2021 about antibodies that have to do with other coronaviruses that have nothing to do with the SARS coronavirus, either SARS-CoV-1 or SARS-CoV-2. Yeah, total fucking expert.
Congratulations. You're everything we've come to expect from years of government training. And now, if you'll just follow me, we have one more test to administer, an eye exam.
So let's move on to our next work of propaganda. This is from ABC 12 News, or ABC News, okay? Doctors say natural immunity lasts about 90 days. Now remember, this girl's propaganda that came out about the 3 months, she fixated on the 3 months, even though it said between, what was it, like fucking 3 months and 64 months? She focuses on the 3 months, right? And her article, remember, was in October of 2021. So our next article, which is, as I said, from ABC News, which is talking about the 90 days, which is 3 months, is from February of 2022. Let's look at what this article has here, right? Flint, Michigan. There are now more than 65 million people who have recovered from COVID-19 in the United States. The CDC says those people have natural immunity to the virus, but only for a period of time. Doctors say for people who recovered from COVID-19, immunity to the virus can last anywhere from about 3 months to 5 years. So just like the propagandist Hannah likes to fixate on the lowest amount of days in the title, or at least in the summarization of the article, this one too is fixating on the lowest possible number. So even though it says from 3 months to 5 years, the title of this, which is probably the farthest most people are going to fucking read, the title of this decides to say, doctors say natural immunity lasts about 90 days. Flint area doctor Bobby, whatever the fuck his name is, says natural immunity doesn't last forever. After 90 days, we should add to that immunity by using vaccination, said this douchebag. Those antibody levels are going to be dropping significantly, and we've seen so many people get it again and again. So once again here, he's focusing on the antibodies. Now another thing that these people are not focusing on is, okay, let's see these people who do get it again and again. Why don't we look at the severity for those people? Because remember, that was the whole purpose of this whole lockdown and stuff, is that they needed to flatten the hospital curve, right? 14 days to flatten the curve. What it was is that it was a very severe virus, so apparently, according to them, that was getting a lot of people hospitalized. What was really happening is the hospitals were exercising medical malpractice and putting people on ventilators that didn't need to be on ventilators, which caused them to have to stay in the hospital, which caused hospital overcrowding. Had very little to do with the virus and everything to do with how the hospitals were treating the virus. So anyway, the whole point was that the virus was supposed to be so severe. So why is it that every time they talk about people who were infected with the virus multiple times, they never talk about the severity? Are the people who test positive a second time or third time, are they asymptomatic? Are they severe infections, or are they not severe infections? I'm willing to bet that they're not severe at all, and that's why they're not actually talking about the severity. So anyway, this guy goes on to say, especially if you're at risk, have an immune system issue, or are a senior, you don't want to roll the dice with that. What a fucking piece of shit. These people are such scumbags. So now the next article that we're going to be looking at comes to us from Time magazine. Now, a big reason why I have to cover all of these articles, and I don't want to just cover one article, is because I want to show the degree that the conspiracy or the degree that the corruption is actually going on. Practically everything that happens according to their script. And that's what I'm trying to show. All of these different news articles, all of these different news outlets, all of these different media outlets are all taking part in this misinformation and disinformation campaign. So let's look at this Time magazine article titled, "Most Americans have had COVID-19. That doesn't mean they won't get it again." Now this article is actually a pretty recent article from April of 2022. Now the main thing that I want to highlight in this article is this piece right here. A study from United Kingdom researchers published in the New England Journal of Medicine in March found that infection-related immunity stays strong for up to a year, then began to wane, whereas the protection offered by 2 doses of a Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine begins to wane at around 6 months. Meanwhile, a research review published in the Annals of Internal Medicine in April concluded that people who'd recovered from COVID-19 had significant protection against reinfection for at least 7 months. So right here, this Time magazine article, it actually is admitting that natural immunity is in fact better than at least the Pfizer vaccine immunity. So I found that to be very interesting. However, if we actually look at the study that this Time magazine is looking at, or this Time magazine article is looking at, this one right here, that doesn't mean they won't get it again. Check out this study. Look at how this study was conducted, okay? So, protection against SARS-CoV-2 after COVID-19 vaccination and previous infection. Look at how they conducted this study. All we have to do is look at the methods. We investigated the duration and effectiveness of immunity in a prospective cohort of asymptomatic healthcare workers in the United Kingdom who underwent routine polymerase chain reaction (PCR) testing. Vaccine effectiveness and infection-acquired immunity were assessed by comparing the time to PCR-confirmed infection in vaccinated persons with that in unvaccinated persons, stratified according to previous infection status. Okay, I know that might sound confusing. So, in order to check for immunity, all this study did was test for positive infections. So, when somebody got infected, when they had a positive result, they would then wait to see how long it was until they became sick again, or until, I guess, they became positive again. I don't even know how. I mean, it doesn't really tell us here. But this is a ridiculous study. This is not science. This is not science at all. This is just saying, are you positive? Are you testing positive? This doesn't tell us anything about immunological memory. It doesn't even tell us anything about antibodies. So this study is total garbage, but that doesn't stop Time magazine from reporting on it. So I'd like to finish this video off by looking at an article that this total sellout POS Dr. David Bauer wrote in The Guardian. Now, it's interesting. We actually saw a lot of propaganda come from The Guardian. That was not intentional. That's just how it came out in the Google searches. But let's first look at the article that he published in The Guardian. So this is an opinion piece in The Guardian. It was authored by, as you can see here, David L.V. Bauer. It's titled, "As a Virologist, I'm shocked my work has been hijacked by anti-vaxxers." Let's read what he says here. "As a virologist, I've spent the past year or more studying the novel coronavirus that has upended all our lives." It wasn't the virus that upended our lives. It was the government's response to the virus that upended our lives. Get that fucking straight. "Communicating our work to the public and speaking to the media is an important part of my job, and I've always tried to be clear and accurate about the science. I believe the available vaccines against COVID-19 are safe, and they are our best route back to a more normal way of living. I've been concerned about the anti-vaccination movement since before the pandemic, but I never imagined that my own work could actually be part of their misinformation arsenal. So I was shocked to discover that a recent TV interview I did for ITV London News had been seized on by anti-vax and conspiracy activists and now has thousands of likes, shares, and retweets across social media. The original interview was about our research on the Pfizer vaccine, which found that the antibody levels it generates are not as good at neutralizing the Delta variant than against the original Wuhan strain." Now I'm going to prove that right here what he's saying here is a complete lie. So let's just get this straight. He's saying that their original research found that the antibody levels it generates are not as good at neutralizing the Delta variant than against the original Wuhan strain. What sophistry there? The antibody levels it generates are not as good at neutralizing the Delta variant. Whatever, let's look at what he actually said. Let's look at the full video. Here's the full video. Not taken out of context, not edited in any way.
The key message from our finding is that we found that recipients of the Pfizer vaccine, those who've had 2 doses, have about 5 to 6-fold lower amounts of neutralizing antibodies. Now, these are the sort of gold standard private security antibodies of your immune system, which block the virus from getting into your cells in the first place. And so we found that that's less for people with 2 doses. We've also found that for people people with only one dose of the Pfizer jab, that they are less likely to have high levels of these antibodies in their blood. And perhaps most importantly for all of us going forward is that we see that the older you are, the lower your levels are likely to be. And the time since you've had your second jab, as that time goes on, the lower your levels are also likely to be. So that's telling us that we're probably going to be needing to prioritize boosters for older and more vulnerable people coming up soon, especially if this new variant spreads.
Okay, so he made it very clear there that the levels were found to be lower in people who had the vaccine. Now, who are you comparing that to? Lower than who? Than people who aren't vaccinated. So let's look at the actual paper. So this is the paper in the National Library of Medicine. As you see, Dr. L.V. Bauer, his name is right there at the end. Let's look at the conflict of interest real quick, before we look at the information in the paper. CSW reports grants from this group, that group, this group. Oh, and Pfizer! Look at that. Is this why this guy is trying so hard to backpedal on his statements? Well, let's not look at his statements. Let's look at this line from the paper. These data, once again, another article or another person who doesn't know how to write. Data is a plural word. You don't need to pluralize it with these. It's very simple. This data, together with epidemiological data of this variant, raise the possibility that this variant of concern, that's what VOC stands for here, present a dual challenge of reduced vaccine efficacy akin to this variant of concern and increased transmissibility beyond this variant of concern. The impact of such a change is challenging to predict. It remains difficult to assess precisely to what extent the reduction in neutralizing antibodies we observe will impact vaccine efficacy and increase disease severity in a vaccinated population, especially given the multiple factors that contribute to this process, such as long-lived humoral immunity. What they're trying to say here is it might be perfectly fine that there's a reduction in these neutralizing antibodies because they don't know the role of the long-lived humoral immunity. So they're saying, oh no, it's okay that this reduction, or at least they say it remains difficult to assess, so they don't really say whether it's okay or not. They just simply say that people who are trying to say that this is bad can't say this is bad. That's actually what they really are saying there. They're saying it's difficult to assess what the actual reduction, what effect this reduction in neutralizing antibodies will have on the effectiveness of the vaccine. So what this guy, David Bauer, said over here is a complete lie. The research did not find that the antibody levels it generated are not good at neutralizing the Delta variant. That's not what the research found. Okay? It found that people who got vaccinated had an actual reduction of these neutralizing antibodies. See, and I covered this in another video. I'm sorry, I have to make this very clear. Okay? The sophistry, what they're trying to pull off here. See, the vaccine showed a reduction in these neutralizing antibodies when compared to unvaccinated individuals. Individuals who were unvaccinated, who probably got a natural infection, or actually who had no infection, had higher levels of these neutralizing antibodies in their system. Now, these neutralizing antibodies, I don't think that they're directly attributed to COVID or any one thing. They're just a general antibody, okay? So the people who got the vaccine had a reduction in those general antibodies. Now, their sophistry, though, is trying to make it as if the vaccine produced neutralizing antibodies, but it didn't produce a high enough level of those neutralizing antibodies. But that's not true at all. That's a fucking lie. That's not misinformation or disinformation. That is a straight up lie. However, if they wanted to, they could try to rationalize it, and what they could say is like, oh yeah, there's a reduction in these antibodies because the body starts to focus on producing these other antibodies, the spike protein antibodies, for the specific spike protein antibodies for the virus. The problem with this, if these vaccines are causing the body to not produce these general neutralizing antibodies, if it's causing the body to produce fewer of those so that it can produce more of these specific spike proteins that are specific for the coronavirus, the problem with that is then you are saving yourself from COVID-19, but you're opening yourself up to other illnesses, to other infections, to other viruses and bacteria. And that's exactly why one of my first videos that I made about this was called Why They Really Need Boosters. And I'm basically in this video, I put forward the idea that they're basically giving people an acquired immune deficiency syndrome with these vaccines. And what's hilarious is, like, I put this video out like 7 months ago, and I think only like 4 months ago, you started to have the VADES thing being talked about on sites like BitChute. Okay, now the very last thing that I would like to do in this video, yeah, I'm just looking at some of my stuff. The very last thing that I would like to talk about in this video is another article that I've talked about many times. This has got to be like the 5th or the 6th time that I'm talking about this article, which can be found on the American Red Cross website. So this article right here proves that everything that they've ever said about vaccines being better than natural immunity is a downright lie. So let's look at this article. Once again, it's titled Answers to Common Questions About COVID-19 Vaccines and Blood, Platelet, or Plasma Donation Eligibility. So these are common questions that the American Red Cross gets when it comes to donating blood, platelet, or plasma donations. Well, when donating those things, you can't donate donations, right? So anyway, let's look at what this says, right? So this is question number 3 in like their list of questions. What is the difference between COVID-19 antibodies that you develop from exposure to the virus and antibodies you develop as a reaction to the vaccine? Answer: antibodies that an individual produces when they've been exposed to the virus are slightly different from the antibodies that an individual produces when they've been vaccinated. When an individual has been infected with a virus, they produce antibodies to multiple regions of a virus, including the nucleocapsid protein. An individual who has received a COVID-19 vaccine will produce antibodies to the spike protein of the virus, but not the nucleocapsid protein, which will only occur in the event of a COVID-19 infection. So that right there dispels all of the misinformation, all of the disinformation, all of that shit that they use to coerce people into getting vaccinated. Alright, there's one more thing I want to discuss in this video, or there's one more thing I want to show you in this video. So when I was looking at this Pfizer study, the one about the reduction of the neutralizing antibodies, I noticed something. I look at a lot of these scholarly articles, a lot of these research papers. So when I came across this paper, I immediately noticed something. This is me just kind of scrolling through it. Maybe you guys notice the same thing that I noticed. Okay, they got their references at the bottom. Well, I'll start it at the top again, okay? Start from the top. This is the very top, okay? You guys notice anything? Alright, I'll show you. Typically, almost every research paper, or at least actually every research paper I've ever read, all of them have an abstract, they go over their methodology, they have a thing for their results, they have conclusions, and then they actually will give you the research article here. Okay, so they have usually like a summarization of what the article contains or what the research paper contains. Here goes another one. You see they have like an introduction or an abstract, or the structured abstract, the introduction, the rationale behind the thing, the results. They usually have this. They have the conclusions, the conclusions of the based on the results, what they're concluding off the results, and then they have the actual whole thing for the person to read for themselves. Typically, every research paper is written like this, and they're all very lengthy because of this. You see this one is incredibly lengthy. This is the one about the immunological memory, very lengthy. You see the sidebar over here? This is just jam-packed with data. I don't want to see your recommendations. Just jam-packed with data, information. Of course, it has its acknowledgments at the end. This is a very well-written paper. Of course, I guess it actually doesn't go all the way down. Actually, it has its references. That's why it goes all the way down. Lots of references. Let's look at another one. And it's not just the website. It's not this is the neutralizing antibody reduction. It's not this website. It's not the National Library of Medicine that's doing this, because there are plenty of research papers on this that have the abstract, have the introduction, have the breakdown that all of these articles usually have, or all of these research papers normally have. And you see this one's also very lengthy, like most of them normally are. So let me just compare it again, once again, to this Pfizer paper here. You see it's really short. You see the sidebar really short. Just I'd say like a dozen paragraphs worth of information, not even. And then it just has 7 references. Look at these other papers. Let's see the immunological memory one. How many references did that have? I think it had like 20 something, more, 30 something, 40 something, 46, 50, 60, 70, 80, 83 references. Okay? For the immunological memory one. This is the actual good research paper. This was the one good research article, or the one good research paper that I saw the entire time out of the 2 years worth of research papers that have come out. I came across one. Every other one is complete sophistry. It just focuses on the antibodies. They focus on other coronaviruses that aren't even really related to the SARS-CoV-2. They ignore the information, or the immunological information for SARS-CoV-1. I mean, it's just absurd.